Well, here we are. It's kind of late in the evening. This is a kind of a sunset. It's my last day on the island. I'll be returning back home and back to school. I'm going to finish the book today, and this is chapter 18 and 19. 18 and 19. And then I'll fly back home. Well, I probably have to take a boat to the mainland or to Curacao itself, and then fly home from there. And then I'll be off again because the next book is Cave of the Moving Shadows. So I'll have to maybe go out somewhere, between France and Spain. That's where I know there's a lot of Cro-Magnon caves or early human caves. And that's where our next story takes place. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 18. There was no day or night that passed when I didn't listen for sounds from the sky. Both my sense of touch and my sense of hearing were beginning to make up for my lack of sight. I separated the sounds and each became different. I grew to know the different cries of the birds that flew by the cay, even though I had no idea what any of them were. I made up my own names for them according to the sound of their cries. Only the occasional bleat of the gull gave me a picture of that bird, for I had heard and seen them many times around the seawall in Willemstad. I knew how the breeze sounded when it crossed the sea grape. It fluttered the small leaves. When it went through the palm fronds the storm hadn't ripped away, it made a flapping noise. I knew the rustle of the lizards. Some were still on the island after the storm. I could only guess they'd somehow climbed high into the palms. Otherwise, how could they have lived with water lapping over the entire cay? I even knew when Cat was approaching me. His soft paws on a dried leaf made only a tiny crackle, but I heard it. One mid-morning in early August, I was on the hill. Early August? April, May, June, July, August, 5 months. 5 months he's been missing. One mid-morning in early August, I was on the hill near the camp when I heard the far-off drone of an airplane. It was upwind from me, but the sound was very clear. I reached down to feel Cat. He had heard it too. His body was tense, his head pointed toward the sound. I dropped to my knees by the fire, feeling around the edges until I grasped the end of a stick. I drew it back. Timothy had taught me to lay the fire sticks like a wheel so that the fire burned slowly in the center, but always had a few unburned ends on the outside. I tended the fire a half dozen times a day. I spit on the stick until I heard the sizzle. Then I knew there was enough fire or charring on it to light off the base of dried palm fronds beneath the signal fire. Remember, he has a small fire, campfire, runs down with the stick that's burning to touch off the big signal fire. I listened again for the drone. Yes, it was still there, closer now. I ran down the hill straight to the signal fire, felt around the palm fronds, and then pushed the stick over them. I blew on it until I heard the crackle of flames. In a few minutes, the signal fire was roaring, and I ran to South Beach where I would be able to hear the aircraft without hearing the crackling fire. Standing on South Beach, I listened. The plane was coming closer. I yelled toward the sky, "Here, down here!" I decided to run back to East Beach to stand near the fire and the new arrangement of rocks that spelled out help, thinking at any moment the plane would dive and I would hear the roar of its engines across the cay at low altitude. I stood with Cat a few feet from the sloshing surf, waiting. I waited, but there was no thundering sound from the sky. I could hear nothing but the crackling of the fire and the washing sound of the surf. I ran back to South Beach where I stood very still and listened. The plane had gone. Slowly, I returned to East Beach and sat down in sea grape shade. I put my head down on my arms and sobbed, feeling no shame for what I was doing. There seemed to be no hope of ever leaving the cay, yet I knew I could not always live this way. One day, I would become ill or another storm would rage against the island. I could never survive alone. And that's the other thing. Can you imagine being alone waiting, knowing you're going to die before your time. There had been many bad and lonely days and nights, but none as bad as this. Cat came up purring, rubbing along my legs. I held him a long time, wondering why the aircraft had not come down when the pilot saw the smoke. At last I thought perhaps they didn't see the smoke. I knew it was going up into the sky, but was it white smoke that might be lost in the blue-white sky? Or was it dark and oily smoke that would make a smudge against the blueness? There was no way to tell. If it was white and you're in the airplane, you're looking down and you see like the white foams and things, or the white sea foam in the ocean, you wouldn't really notice white smoke. But if you saw oily dark smoke, that might be easier to see when you're way up in the sky in an airplane. If there were only some oily boards, the kind that driftwood around the waters of the Scott Gap. But I knew that the wood floating up on the beach consisted mostly of branches or stumps that had been in the water for weeks or months. There was nothing in them to make dark smoke. I began to think of all the things on the island. Green palm fronds might send off dark smoke, but until they were dried, they were too tough to tear off the trees. The vines on North Beach might make dark smoke, but the leaves on them were very small. The sea grape. I snapped some off, feeling it between my fingers. Yes, there was oil on it. I got up and went over to the fire, tossed a piece in. In a moment, I heard it popping the way hot grease pops when it is dropped into water. I knew how to do it now. The smoke would rise from the Cay in a fat black column to lead the planes up the Devil's Mouth. If I heard another aircraft, I'd start a fire and then throw bundles of sea grape into it until I was certain a strong signal was going up from the island. Timothy hadn't thought about black smoke. I was sure that was it. Feeling better now, I walked back up the hill to gather the few palm fronds that were left for a new fire base. I woke up at dawn on the morning of August 20th, 1942. August 20th. So now, he was in early August last time. So April, May, June, July, August, 5 total months now. I woke up at dawn on the morning of August 20th, 1942, to hear thunder and wondered when the first drops of rain would spatter on the roof of the shelter he built. I heard Cat down near my feet let out a low growl. I said, "It's only thunder, Cat. We need the water." But as I continued to listen, it did not seem to be thunder. It was a heavy sound, hard and sharp, not rolling, more like an explosion or a series of explosions. It felt as if the Cay were shaking. I got up from the mat, moving out from under the shelter. The air did not feel like rain. It was dry, and there was no heavy heat. "They're explosions, Stu," I said, "very near us." Maybe destroyers, I thought. Those are ships that hunt U-boats. Maybe destroyers, I thought. I could not hear any aircraft engines. Maybe destroyers fighting it out with enemy submarines. And those heavy, hard, sharp sounds could be the depth charges that my father said were used by the Navy to sink U-boats. Remember at the first we looked at what depth charges were? This time, I didn't bother to take a piece of firewood down to East Beach. I dug into the tin box for the cellophane-wrapped package of big wooden matches. 4 were left. 4 matches left. That's all I had. I ran down the hill. Hold on. It's all better now. I ran down the hill. At the signal fire, I searched for a rock. Finding one, I knelt down by the fire and struck a match against it. Nothing happened. I felt the head of the match. The sulfur had rubbed off. One down. I struck another. It made a small popping noise and then went out. I had 2 more matches left, and for a moment, I didn't know whether to use them or run back up the hill to the campfire. I stopped to listen, feeling sweat trickle down my face. The explosions were still thundering across the sea. Then I heard the drone of an aircraft. I took a deep breath and struck the next to last match. I heard it flare and ran my left hand over the top of it. There was heat. It was burning. I reached deep into the fire pile, holding the match there until it began to burn the tips of my fingers. The fire caught and in a moment was roaring. I ran back across the beach to begin pulling sea grape down. Remember, that's going to cause the dark smoke. I carried the first bundle to the fire and threw it in. Soon I could smell it burning. It began to pop and crackle as the flames got to the natural oils in the branches. By the time I had carried 10 or 15 bundles of sea grape to the fire, tumbling them in, I was sure that a column of black smoke was rising into the sky over the Cay. Suddenly a deafening roar swept overhead. I knew it was an aircraft crossing the Cay not much higher than the palms. I could feel the wind from it. Forgetting for a moment, I yelled, "Timothy, they've come!" He forgot that Timothy's not there. The aircraft seemed to be making a sharp turn. It roared across the Cay again, seeming even lower this time, because the rush of wind from it was hot. I could smell the exhaust fumes. I yelled, down here," and waved my arms. The plane made another tight circle, coming back almost directly over me. Its engine was screaming. I shouted at Stu Cat, "We'll be rescued!" But I think he'd gone into a hide in the sea grape. This time, however, the aircraft did not circle back. It did not make another low pass over the island. I heard the sound going away. Soon it had vanished completely. Then I realized that the explosions had stopped too. A familiar silence settled over the Cay. All the strength went out of my body. It was the first real chance of rescue, and maybe there would not be another. The pilot had flown away, perhaps thinking I was just another native fisherman waving at an aircraft. I knew that the color of my skin was very dark now. Worse, I knew that the smoke might have blotted out the lines of rocks that spelled help. Feeling very ill, I climbed the slope again, throwing myself down on the mat in the hut. I didn't cry. There was no use in doing that. I wanted to die. After a while, I looked over toward Timothy's grave. I said, "Why didn't you take us with you?" Chapter 19. It was about noon when I heard the bell. It sounded like bells I'd heard in St. Anna Bay and in the Scott Gap. Small boats and tugs used them to tell the engineer to go slow or fast or put the engines in reverse. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard the bell again, and with it the slow chugging of an engine and voices. They were coming from East Beach. I ran down there. Yes, a small boat had come into the Devil's Mouth and was approaching our Cay. I yelled, "I'm here! I'm here!" There was a shout from across the water, a man's voice. "We see you!" I stood there on East Beach, Stu Cat by my feet, looking in the direction of the sounds. I heard the bell again. Then the engine went into reverse, the propeller thrashing. Someone yelled, "Jump, Scotty, the water's shallow." The voice was American, I was certain. The engine was now idling, and someone was coming toward me. I could hear him padding across the sand. I said, "Hello?" There was no answer from the man. I suppose he was just staring at me. Then he yelled to someone on the boat, "My Lord, it's a naked boy and a cat." The person on the boat yelled, "Anyone else?" I called out, "No, just us." I began to move toward the man on the beach. He gasped, Are you blind?" I said, "Yes, sir." In a funny voice, he asked, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine now. You're here," I said. He said, "Here, boy, I'll help you." I said, "If you'll carry Stu Cat, you can just lead me on the boat." After I had climbed aboard, I remembered Timothy's knife stuck in the palm tree. It was the only thing I wanted off the Cay. The sailor who had carried Stu Cat went up the hill to get it, while the other sailor asked me questions. When the first sailor came back from the hill, he said, "You wouldn't believe what's up there." I guess he was talking about our hut and the rain catchment. He should have seen the ones Timothy built. I don't remember everything that happened in the next few hours, but very soon I was helped up the gangway of a destroyer. So now they took him on the small boat back to the larger boat, which is the destroyer. The destroyer couldn't have gone near the Cay because of the coral reefs. On deck, I was asked so many questions all at once that one man barked, "Stop badgering him, give him food and medical care, and get him into a bunk." A voice answered meekly, "Yes, sir, Captain." Down in sickbay, the captain asked, "What's your name, son?" "Philip Enright. My father lives in Willemstad. He works for Royal Dutch Shell," I answered. The captain told someone to get a priority radio message off to the naval commander at Willemstad, and then asked, "How did you get on that little island?" "Timothy and I drifted onto it after the Hatta was sunk." "Where's Timothy?" I told the captain about Timothy and what had happened to us. I'm not sure the captain believed any of it because he said quietly, "Son, get some sleep. The Hatta was sunk way back in April." See, they're thinking that's too long for a little blind kid to survive out here with even with someone else like Timothy. So he's kind of saying, "Yeah, that was sunk a long time ago. Probably not." I said, "Yes, sir, that's right." And then a doctor came in to check me over. That night, after the ship had been in communication with Willemstad, the captain visited me again to tell me that his destroyer had been hunting a German submarine when the plane had spotted my black smoke and radioed back to the ship. There was still disbelief in his voice when he said he'd checked all the charts and publications on the bridge. Our Cay was so small that the charts wouldn't even dignify it with a name. It wasn't even named. It was just a Cay. It was just there. But Timothy had been right. It was tucked back up in the devil's mouth. The next morning, we docked at the naval base in Cristobal, Panama, and I was rushed to a hospital, although I really didn't think it was necessary. I was strong and healthy, the doctor on the destroyer had said. My mother and father flew over from Willemstad in a special plane. Remember, his mom was so scared about flying, but now when she realizes her son is alive, she'll do anything. It was minutes before they could say anything. They just held me, and I knew my mother was crying. She kept saying, "Philip, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The Navy had notified them that I was blind, so that it would not be a shock. And I knew I looked different. They'd brought in a barber to cut my hair, which had grown quite long. We talked for a long time, Stu Cat on my bed, and I tried to tell them all about Timothy and the Cay. But it was very difficult. They listened, of course, but I had the feeling that neither of them really understood what had happened on our Cay. That's the part that always gets me, because it's one of those things where you had to have been there. He could tell them what a man Timothy was, what a friend he was, how special he was, and the things they did together. You could tell somebody that, but how do you get them to see it and understand it? 4 months later, in a hospital in New York, after many x-rays and tests, I had the first of 3 operations. The piece of timber that had hit me the night the Hatta went down and damaged some nerves. But after the 3rd operation, when the bandages came off, I could see again. I would always have to wear glasses, but I could see. That was the important thing. In early April, I returned to Willemstad. So now we're a year later. I returned to Willemstad with my mother, and we took up life where it had been left off the previous April. After I'd been officially reported lost at sea, she'd gone back to Curacao to be with my father. She had changed in many ways. She had no thoughts of leaving the islands now. I saw Heinrich van Boven occasionally, but it wasn't the same as when we'd played the Dutch or the British. He seemed very young. When people go through something life-altering like Philip did, they grow up fast, and he had to grow up fast. So now his friend Heinrich, who has still been like a schoolboy this last year, seemed so young to him. He seemed very young. So I spent a lot of time along St. Anna Bay and at the Ruttercade Market talking to the Black people. I liked the sound of their voices. Some of them had known old Timothy from Charlotte Amalie. I felt close to them. At war's end, we moved away from Scarlou and Curacao. My father's work was finished. Since then, I've spent many hours looking at charts of the Caribbean. And if you had Google Earth back then, it would be easy to find the Cay, I think. I found Roncador, Rosalind, Quito Sueno, and Serenia Banks. I found Beacon Cay and North Cay and the islands of Providencia and San Andreas. I've also found the Devil's Mouth. Someday, I'll charter a schooner out of Panama and explore the Devil's Mouth. I hope to find the lonely little island where Timothy is buried. Maybe I won't know it by sight, but when I go ashore and close my eyes, I'll know this was our own Cay. I'll walk along East Beach and out to the reef. I'll go up the hill to the row of palm trees and stand by his grave. I'll say, "This be that outrageous Cay, huh, Timothy?" And that's it. That's all she wrote. Well, congratulations, you made it through. Good job sticking with us. It's a beautiful book, as you can clearly see. At least I hope you feel the same way. Most students do. And I'm going to be flying out or shipping out tomorrow, and I will see you back in class. Until then, you guys take care of yourselves. There is a sequel. Well, it's a prequel sequel to this book. We will not read it. I've read it before, and I liked it. But if you want more background on Timothy and Philip, there's a book called Timothy of the Cay by the same author, Theodore Taylor, Timothy of the Cay. And you can always check it out in a library or a virtual library, or order it or buy it. It gives you information about Timothy's life before he ever met Philip, and it gives you information about how Philip tries to charter a boat as he grows up and wants to come out to the Cay again and try to find the Cay that Timothy's buried on. So if you want to do that, I suggest it if you want to. If you're a good reader, if you're an avid reader and you love books, I would look up that one if I were you. All right, guys, you take care. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.